What do you see on the horizon in 2025?
Yeah, if I'm Will asking what's in my crystal ball for next year for 2025, a couple of things, of course, centered around AI, most of them. But I think 2025 will be the year when marketers and users of AI generally break out of the productivity box and start exploring the transformative growth box. Much of what we've been talking about, how we've been using, how we've been applying AI is to sort of get to the same outcome, but faster, easier, and cheaper. It's been the so-called 2024 I've heard is described as the year of the faster horse, in air quotes, right? I mean, what does that mean? Write me a blog post. Well, it's still the same kind of blog post, but it gets there faster. Write me a creative brief. Oh, okay, fine. Same creative brief gets me there faster. Summarize the minutes from this meeting. Well, it's still the meeting summary, but it just gets us there faster and easier and cheaper. But this thing is a rocket ship, right? I mean, it can do amazingly different things, and we're only beginning as an industry, I think, Will, to start to scratch the surface of what it's capable of doing in a truly transformational top-line growth way, not just, doing the same for less. The second one, I think 2025 will be the year when we see what's been known in the industry for many years as the customer data platform, a traditional CDP, which has been undergoing kind of changes. I think this is the year when we're really going to see it unleashed as a multi-cloud native and AI native solution, as opposed to, we've been doing the ETL and we've been copying, into Adobe, into Salesforce for years. But now, of course, everybody's data sits in Salesforce or, Google BigQuery, or it sits in Databricks. And so I think, many providers are racing, including the big guys, to now make things that are zero copy, multi-cloud native and AI from inception, not, we tack on an ability to have a chat interface in it. Right. Yeah. And so I think that's a big one. I think the third one, Will, that we'll see is 2025 is the year when marketers will get serious, when they'll have to get serious about not SEO, but GEO, generative engine optimization. As of course, Google is now all in on, AI interface, but of course we've got now Search GPT and Perplexity and lots of other players. I'll give you two more. I think the fourth one is 2025 is going to be the year when we're going to see some significant regional, if not global, regulation and legislation around AI. Now that we've got the U.S. election cycle settled and behind us here, new leadership coming in January. So I think that will be one. And then the last one, AI related, but maybe not in the way you might think, is I really think it's going to be the year when marketers need to take notice of Gen Alpha arriving on the scene. We've got, of course, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and here we go with those born in 2010 or later who will be turning 16. So, now decision-making, technology, spending power, right? All of these things where brands, not just brands that market to youth, but all brands are going to have to start having some serious conversations about who is this cohort, how are they different, and what do we need to do to appeal to them? So those are my big five.
Well, how long you got? Because there's some questions. That's
Yeah.
good old can of worms. Thank you for that. I love that. Just on that Gen Alpha bit, just tell me, have you got any insight into primarily how they're different and how we need to respond to that as marketers?
Yeah, I mean, three ways. One is because of, think about this. For a 12-year-old, they've lived a third of their life under COVID. For many of us, it was a blip. It was an unpleasant blip. It was a challenging blip, but it's a blip in a long life well lived, right? But if you're 12, it was a third of your life. And so as a result, they needed to lean into technology different than previous generations, right? Yes, they like gaming. Yes, they're tech savvy. But for them, it was a means to socializing and interacting and building community. It's not just about getting the high score in the game when we're playing Xbox Live. It's how I make friends, right? And, we've all sort of maybe fallen into this trap of like, technology will substitute for some things, but nothing beats being in person, right? Well, they've learned how to do this through technology. So I think there's one. I think the second thing is, in terms of, because they have access to all the news and information and social changes and world conflicts at their fingertips, they're now very sensitive to, things like ethical supply chains, social values of brands, B Corps. And so, there are some who are saying, and, chapter future remains to be written, but there are some saying that this might be the most sort of brand and socially active generation since those who came of age in the late 60s. We'll see on that one. And then the third, Will, is that they learn through gamification and brands. So if you think about character AI, if you think about Roblox, if you think about Crunch Labs, that's Mark Rober's company, right? YouTube superstar. They learn through gamification and Duolingo. So, what does this mean if I'm a brand and I need to teach, train, educate, tell something to my Gen Alphas? I'm not sure that an Instagram post is going to be sufficient, right? I mean, I think there's probably different ways that we have to engage them, touching on our sort of social values and, allowing them to engage with a community digitally.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a child who plays a lot of Roblox. I play it with him. I think it's very fun, and it reminds me of the old days of Second Life. So
Yeah, right. Linden Labs
with him.
Yeah.
But and I think back to that and how this has come about. But it's always been about experiences. It's been the exciting thing for brands is like, let's not just put out an Instagram post, let's create an experience. And maybe there is gamification in that as well. And I've seen a few waves of that, I feel, over and you have, I'm sure, over your digital life. But they are fully immersed in it in a way that no other generation has been. You're right. And
I think brands need to kind of wake up to this and start studying this in 2025. Before the train leaves the station, so-called, and, everybody's playing catch-up.
I think it's like video and other kind of, high-effort formats before it. I think what scares a lot of marketers is, that sounds expensive, sounds hard work.
Yes. The good news, though, is now we have AI to help enable us, right, which we didn't have previously.
No, we didn't, and that's very on topic in our household because my said 8-year-old son, he's building a Roblox game and he's got ChatGPT open in one window and Roblox Studio in the other, and yeah, absolutely, and I find that very, very interesting. You talked about CDPs, yes, these customer data platforms. So you think, and I'm not sure to what extent anybody's really done this, but my expectation of this has always been if you properly integrate AI with that. AI, one thing it's really good at is working with structured data for a start. It makes moving data around from one app or one place to another really easy in a way that's very tedious for us or some poor data entry intern or someone, right? It takes away a lot of obvious pain points and creates the opportunity to do something new at scale that we never could have done. It's not just making something easier and quicker, which I'm always slightly suspicious of as a use case for AI. It's enabling something that just was not possible. Perhaps is it one? What are those opportunities, though, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the brass ring of personalization at scale is certainly what a lot of these, I'll call them next gen, new gen CDP providers are thinking about. I mean, there's always been skepticism of like, is that truly possible? And if it is possible, even economically possible, does it actually drive higher ROI? But we couldn't even do it before to get to the answer of that question, right? And, if you think about, back to the late 80s and Peppers and Rogers and one-to-one marketing, right? Like the dream always existed, but it just wasn't physically or economically possible. And now when we start to see sort of this next gen where we're not copying data all over the place and incurring that cost, and as you say, AI brain can now help us identify the NBX, next best X, next best customer, next best message, next best channel, next best price, next best creative message. I think you're really going to see, agentic AI operating within these new wave CDPs. I mean, we need a new title or a new category name for what these are going to be, because they're going to be fundamentally different than some of the early ones that we saw, in the late 20 teens.
This agentic AI, these AI agents who go off and work through multi-step tasks on their own accord and come
Mhm.
back with finished work. I mean, that to me, by the way, sounds like the dream. And I'll probably take, work off low-level admin staff who are just moving bits of information around, really. But hopefully, we'll just enable them to do more advanced things. That's my hope. um, but so thinking about that and about not job replacement, but job changes, what career advice would you have for someone in marketing today in terms of sort of bolstering themselves and preparing themselves for that future to be safe?
Yeah. And I mean, considering, my day job, my seat here as a university MBA marketing professor, I would start by saying, um, if you haven't really taken the time to learn formally or informally the actual fundamentals of marketing, and you've sort of been trying to hack your way around this or focused on maybe tactics or
Yeah.
implementation, gosh, now's the time where you need to up level your fundamental understanding of, how to drive growth for a business. Because if you're sort of stuck in tactic or implementation land, right? I mean, those are the jobs that are going to be automated. So, yes, I agree with your hypothesis, Will, and we've seen this in previous technology waves that, that's an opportunity to up level work, but you need to be prepared to do that up level work.
Yeah. Yeah. What skills, if you had to, if I really pushed you to like list the skills specifically that are important for people to lean into in marketing, what would you say they are?
Okay, so I mean, I would start with understanding that marketing's fundamental job, right, is to be a growth engine for an enterprise. CFO funds marketing in order for the marketing team to create an ATM machine, if you will, right? Like
Mm.
the CFO gives you 100 heads, $100 million, 10 heads, $10,000 with the expectation that your job is not to drive engagement or likes, friends, fans, followers, downloads. Your job is to come back with, if you get $10 in investment from the CFO, is to come back with $15 in profit. And by the way, incremental profit. So, marketers really need to start getting savvy about sort of the financial aspects. And a lot of marketers say, oh, hey, I'm not a finance expert. I'm a marketer. Well, guess what? If you're in marketing, you need to understand finance. And then second is to say, okay, so then what are the strategies that drive incremental profitable growth? And
Mm.
guess what? I mean, that's a discrete list. It's sell more of the same stuff to my current customers, sell that same stuff to new customers, maybe new targets or new geographies, or sell modified, enhanced, or different stuff to my same customers, right? So we've got sort of the famous Ansoff matrix here, and really start to understand those strategic growth levers. And then, by the way, you get to the tactics of make it tall, make it short, make it red, make it cheaper, make it, more available online, sell it DTC, et cetera. But I think so many marketers have been focused on the tail of the dog, if you will, the tactics, and in particular, the Marcom tactics that we've
Mm.
abdicated or forgotten. Things like, guess what? Strategic pricing. And again, I'm not talking about usury or price gouging, but strategic pricing is a great way to increase profit, right? Like if you have customer advantage and people willing to pay a premium, well, then you should be doing that, right? And so, I think really understanding sort of the financials and the growth strategies and not just living at the tactic or in particular Marcom tactic level is really going to be the future of strong marketers as AI starts to handle a lot of these tactics.
Yes, what I'm hearing a lot and what makes sense to me is we need to become more generally strategic, be thinking more high level. The AI can specialize. It can think about the ins and outs of the tactical stuff. It's our job to drive strategy, but to do that, you know, that's a big topic to learn and get your head around. You're essentially a lot of it's learning about business, essentially, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think the folks who've maybe been in the school of thought of, I don't need to know about business, I don't need to care about
Mm.
strategy, I'm just a growth hacker
Yeah,
designing 5 tests. Well, the
yeah.
AI will design 5 million tests. Then what
Yeah.
are you doing?
In thinking about your role and what you do there at the university, in the last few months, has there been certain things that you've heard students talking about or questioning you about that are in some way new? Are you notice any kind of emerging topics that they're particularly interested in, curious about, worried about, even?
Well, I do think that in particular, we've seen, over the past few years and more recently in particular, students, whether they come out of a computer science background or computer science program or not, or just our marketers and everybody in between, feeling like they need to have the ability to not only deeply understand AI, but be able to build it. So, I have my students this fall here on campus. All of them built their own AI chatbots.
Mm.
We used some tools off the shelf to help us here. We built RAG models, right? We
Cool.
trained it, we tested it, all of these kinds of things, which, I would have met some resistance, if not eye rolls, a year and a half ago of like, what do I need to know how to do that for? Like, that's for the tech guys.
Yeah.
No, guess what? Everybody needs to know how to do that kind of thing. As connecting a previous dot in our conversation, Will, I mean, I think we're all going to have, brand agents, and we're all going to have personal consumer agents. And, it's not sci-fi. We're not that far away from my agent talking to Nike's brand agent and conducting some commerce or transaction on each of our behalfs without Nike humans or me human being there. And the pair of Air Forces show up on my door.
It's like in it's off topic, but in like in movies from the 80s and 90s about wealthy people with like big mobile phones, and it was like, I'll get my people to talk to your
Right,
people,
right, right. Yeah. Yeah.
to flex.
Taylor
It's like,
Swift's PA, her personal assistant, right?
yeah, it'll
Well,
be a bit like that, won't it? Like my
my
agent will talk
my
to your
VA,
agent,
right? My virtual assistant will handle that.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, I mean, I think an early step that we're going to see here is that e-commerce interfaces in 2025 are going to rapidly advance, Will, from being sort of clickable hierarchy based clothes, men's shirts on sale, men's shirts size medium on sale, men's shirts medium on sale in white, right? Like it's this sort of clickable commerce hierarchy that's been around for 20 plus years. Well, I don't want that, right? Like what I want to do is I want to be able to take a wedding invitation and upload a photo of that to a fashion clothing website and say, this thing says semi-formal attire recommended. I have no idea what that is, but you have my Visa card, you know my budget, you know where I live, you know the date of the wedding, get me semi-formal attire here in my size.
Hey, it could even look up the venue and look at like the color scheme and the venue and the style of the church. Is it a
Right?
mega gothic or a mega modern one? I mean, that's, yeah,
I mean, completely.
I like
So,
that.
so, so that's, that's, I think, increasingly when we land on the homepage of an e-commerce site, I think we're going to see a conversational interface start to show
Hmm.
up on these sites in 2025. Because let's face it, this clickable hierarchy is miserable, right?
It
Like
is.
that's not really a way that you would, if you walked into a store on the high street, right? The salesperson would say, hi, what brings you here today? And you would say, I got this wedding invitation, and you would show it to her,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
right? So
Totally.
why are we settling for clickable hierarchy on e-commerce sites for a 21st straight year?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That no one else has really talked about that I've spoken to, but it makes a lot of sense. And of course, that kind of links with this whole thing around first party data. So therefore, it's in a clothing store's interest to upfront say, who are you? What do you want? Because A, I'm going to just take you directly to that. B, I'm going to remember those preferences, and now I know them. That's going to make all of my marketing to you more
Right,
relevant.
right. And again, if I have a Nuvo CDP, I can store it all there,
Yeah,
right? And then kind of the engine gets smarter and smarter and smarter over time.
yeah, interesting. Um, what do you imagine might actually happen in the next year or so legislatively?
Well, look, I mean, I think, we've got a couple of landmarks happening here. One is the U.S. election cycle is behind the world. What the new administration carries forward, remains to be seen. But, I think the distraction of the election and, who's going to be in charge now puts the next folks, however individuals, listeners, watchers feel about that, not making any political statement, but now that group has its new agenda, combined with what I think we're going to see in France in February, right? President Macron, assuming that regime continues, has got the next big AI summit. UK did one last year, but February in Paris is the next one. So if you sort of look at those two anchors of what's the new U.S. administration's agenda and what, by the way, do they attend that summit in Paris or not? And those world leaders who do attend in Paris, I think are going to, start to seriously take a hard look at how do we feel about these tools, perhaps from a, misinformation, election interference standpoint. I think that's a natural starting place for governments, but I think the aperture is going to be much wider in terms of, how do we make sure that we don't grow a digital divide? How do we make sure that our country or countries who are represented at that summit in Paris are not left behind? And how do we make sure that we're part of this next wave? And by the way, legislation and regulation, at the EU level perhaps, but certainly at a country level. We've seen Italy take some decisions on their own. We've seen Japan take some decisions on their own. South Korea take some decisions on its own. So I think we're going to see more of this, as we move forward into 2025. Whether it'll be good or bad for commerce, for, the platforms, for users, that remains to be seen. But I'll remind you that the big platforms all went to Washington, D.C. in 2024 and raised their hand and said, we'd be open to having a conversation about this. Just it wasn't sort of the moment where government in the U.S. was ready to engage in that. I think now no one's surprised by the possibility, of malintent, malicious use of these tools. But that said, there were many, for example, robocalls that were being made to U.S. voter households using voice-generated synthetic of either or both of the candidates or other famous people. You pick up the phone at home and it sounds like a famous person telling you something, but it actually wasn't, right? So, I think there was many instances of that. And I think that will be, among the things that, world leaders will be thinking about. But by the way, we also see it for brands. If Oprah Winfrey is seeming to endorse a brand on Instagram, but it's not really Oprah, right? Like, what does that mean? So I think these are all kind of broader societal, cultural, regulatory issues that, are going to need to be addressed moving forward. And as I said, the platforms are raising their hands saying, we're willing to engage in a conversation like that.
Do you think TikTok will get banned in the US?
Well, I think that's a high likelihood. I think, there's a question of actually how that happens, right? So there's the theory of a ban, but then there's actually the implementation of it. And what does that mean? And by the way, that gets even broader when we start to say, like, if we're going to have some regulation around AI, well, how about for all the people who have open models that are downloaded on their laptop? If a regulation passes, how do we ever enforce that? Are we going to be knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm here to inspect your laptop to see if you've installed an open model and if it's compliant, please? Just, so the difference between sort of the concept or the theory here and the practice of it, I think, that's a long road between those two.
It is. That's a very good point.